Hey, what's up, guys? This is Marco from the Basketball Doctors. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Basketball Speed himself, Lee Taft. So thanks, Lee, for coming in. So yeah, Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Marco, for having me on. I've been looking forward to this, and I appreciate what you guys do. I've been, people ask me a lot of times to describe myself, what I do, and I always just say, basically, I'm just a coach. I started teaching phys ed and coaching 3 sports back in 1989, and over the years, I've been a head coach of basketball for many different programs, and skills coach, and obviously a sports performance coach, plus many other sports. And over the years, I've also owned several facilities. We called them speed academies, even though we did everything, but speed academies attracted people more, and athletes want to get fast, right? And so over the last years, my kind of my profession has gone from, working 16-hour days training athletes to still doing some training, but now I do more consulting. So I spend a lot of time working with, professional, like I've worked with probably 8 or 9 NBA teams, and I work with NFL and baseball, and a lot of individuals, spend a lot of time with tennis, and so that's kind of where I'm at now. And we moved a couple of years ago down here to Florida, so we get to do a lot of stuff year round. And so yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah, awesome. It's a way different lifestyle now, right? Instead of the 16
Sure is.
days. Yeah, Lee. And then I know you mentioned kind of like, you've been working with a lot of basketball players, and a lot of people, like I came across you because of the speed stuff that you do. And like you mentioned, you worked a lot with the speed academies, but there's more involved with just the speed. But I wanted to kind of dive into that because I know one of the biggest misconceptions that we see or hear basketball coaches is more of the speed. Like, how do you train for speed? Because I know when I was younger, it was, hey, let's get on the track, let's run like 2-3 miles or run suicides until you pass out. But yeah, can you go into kind of like what should these high school kids, especially right now when off-season basketball season is coming in and all the kids want to get faster, want to get stronger. Can you elaborate more on this topic of like, how do I get faster as a kid?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'll tell you, it's still, I'll tell you and your listeners a quick story. I have my oldest daughter she just moved out to California just recently, and she's actually working at a basketball facility, doing some stuff there. But when she was here with us in Florida, she was a JV coach for the high school team in the town we live in. And she would come home very frustrated because because she played for me, and she knew how I was very speed and quickness oriented, be the first to the ball, get by your defender, cut defenders up, just everything was speed oriented. And the head coach of the program was same thing, where it was all conditioning based. Everything was conditioning. Even in the spring after the season, and they don't start, so I'm talking now, all the way until like October, November, the season doesn't start. So now is the time when players should be improving things such as explosive quickness, linear, lateral, retreating, vertical, all those types of things. Conditioning, even though it's hard to do in terms of it's not fun, it's the easiest thing to train. I mean, you could do it on a slide board, you can do it on an Aerodyne bike, you can do it out, like you said, on a track. But what the athletes want to have, if they're watching the NCAA tournaments, the players that impact are the ones that have the speed, the ones that are really difficult to defend. They're ones that, if they're great defenders and the offensive player can't get behind them, can't get a shot up because they're so quick. That's what we want. Ultimately, what we want to see them do is be able to improve. Obviously, short distance speed on the court is critical. So if I have anywhere like 5 yards of, even 3 to 5 yards of ability to explode as fast as possible and be able to control that, change direction, that's game-changing type speed. Now, how we get there, we can talk about as we go through, but I think when players right now spend the bulk of their time trying to condition themselves and doing, like you said, suicides, they're actually doing a disservice to themselves as a basketball player and as an athlete, because even if they just played a lot of pickup ball, they're going to get in better shape. And then they can, as they get close, they can do things to get in better shape. But you can't train speed in a weekend. You can't just say, yeah, I think I'm going to go and work on my 20s now all of a sudden. It takes time, and you've got to put dedicated time to it. And that's when we see athletes change.
That's I love what you said about getting in shape. I get all these athletes coming back from injuries. Like, how do I get back in shape? Like, I'm still not in basketball shape. So just go play pickup, just running back and forth in the court. That's a good way to just, I think, I don't know if you agree with this, but you kind of said, but I think the best way to get in shape is just like you said, play basketball. That's going to get in that shape.
What
But
do, exactly. What do the NBA guys always say when they come back off an injury? They're like, you can do all the stuff you want off the court, but until you get back in the game and start playing, you never get that conditioning. So you got to play, because you got to do that quick stopping and starting, and that's what gets you back in shape.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I tell people. Is like, getting back in shape is, you can get that kind of easy just by getting back on the court, playing pickup, go to your local 24-hour fitness, just don't shoot the ball, just play defense. You'll get a couple cardio. But Lee, you mentioned this is not really, like you said, getting back in condition is pretty easy. It's improving your speed, and especially right now is the most important time. So what should people be doing to improve their speed? What's the philosophy on improving their speed, improving that first step? Because you mentioned basketball, you only have those 5, maybe 10 yards that you have to be as fast as possible. Can you go a little bit more into detail on that?
Definitely, yeah. So here's a little recipe that your athletes and the coaches and even parents who might be listening that have young kids, they want to help. To start out, what I would do, and I'm doing this right now with my son. I have a 14-year-old son, and I trained my 2 older daughters. One's playing in college now, one's out. I want them to sprint, okay? And we start out at 20 meters, and then we go every week to 2 weeks, we add 5 meters up to 40 meters. Now, here's why. I know a basketball court isn't 40 meters long, or 30, or even 25 meters. It's hard to get up to top speed. But what happens is when you train that fast, like running at maximal speeds, they're developing better feet, better ankle abilities to create stiffness, and lower leg ability, which allows them to actually build a more robust lower leg. That lower leg, if they build that through these high foot contacts and sprinting, that actually translates well to other things like jumping, cutting, things like, just because it's a stiffer, and when I say stiffer, for the listeners, not like an old guy like me who wakes up stiff in the morning. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the tendons and the tissues actually have the ability to absorb and release energy really fast, and you develop that through simple sprinting. So even if they did 4 sets, 20 yards, up to 35 yards, even in that range, sprints, good recovery, and if they did that twice a week, they're going to get benefit. Then the other thing I like to have them do is mark off 7 yards. And so that would be from the baseline to about 2 feet above the foul line, a yard above the foul, in that range. And they're going to shuffle. They're going to do a lateral defensive shuffle as fast as they can. When they get there, walk back, take a second, even shoot a couple foul shots, go back, do it again on the other side, and do that up to 4 sets on each side. If they did that twice a week, now they're improving their ability to maximally use the lateral gait cycle to get into a shuffle. So now we just talked about improving that ability to get faster. Just, can I get from point A to point B faster? And if you do those 2 things, those will automatically start to increase that ability. Now, we know we have to change directions. We know we have to use a lateral run. We know we have to use hip turn. And then we can start adding that stuff in. Vertical jump we can do. But if you play a lot of basketball, sometimes the vertical takes care of itself. Yeah. But if you're going to train it, there's ways to do it again. Low volume, high effort, recover several days in between, do it again. And they'll be amazed at how much better they'll get at these things. And last point is, don't be fooled by not feeling tired, because athletes say, well, gee, I did it, I went as fast as I could. I just didn't feel tired. I'm like, great. Then you did it the right way. Perfect. Thumbs up, right? You did the right thing. I'm not asking you to condition yourself right now. I'm
Yeah.
trying to change your mind to tell your muscles to do things faster and get your body faster. Then, like we said, the conditioning can come later.
No, that you have some really good points. I like the last one about not getting tired, just because I think the biggest misconception is like, hey, I'm not tired. This wasn't worth it. Or this wasn't a good workout, but we're trying to get max effort in those short amount of periods. It's not like that, chronic fatigue, like, hey, I have, lactic acid running through my legs, like when you're running 2 or 3 miles at top speed. I like that. And then another point that I like that you mentioned about that ankle stiffness. And I know for everyone listening here, it kind of Lee made a big point. It's not ankle mobility stiffness, or it's like you said, stiffness of the joints. It's more stiffness of the tendons for that rapid release.
Yep.
And then Lee, I know you mentioned it's like twice a week they're doing this. Is this more geared towards the off season or in season? And then another question is like, do you train people in season, or is this the only time they could really get faster? Especially now, I kind of want to, progress this conversation to, because nowadays there's technically no off season with these kids. They're
Right.
playing AU like five
Right.
times a week. So how does that how do you fit that into their schedule? I know you mentioned twice a week, which I think is awesome, but how about if they're having their off season is their season pretty much? I know they have more time, but they're still, how do you fit that all in?
Exactly, exactly. Well, again, I'll give you a perfect example because I have a 14-year-old son. He's got a little practice tonight with his team. It's pretty local. They don't do a ton of stuff, but he's got a practice tonight, but today is his training day. So what we'll do is we'll do 3 sets, 25-yard sprints. He'll have a lot of rest in between. He'll get a good warm up before he'll do those sprints. We'll go inside. We'll do 3 sets of 5 vertical jumps, landing on a box. So I'm not eccentrically loading him hard, but I'm giving him that good push. And then he's done with that. Then he'll do his practice later. He'll have a couple hours before, but that's all he needs for his nervous system to adapt and change and to make him faster and more explosive. So now, when in a typical normal year, okay, you have an off season, you might play another sport and do stuff, but if you're trying to train speed, I have my athletes sprint twice a week. When they get in season, we sprint once every 7 to 8 days. And again, the volume, so let's say we're in season, we're getting at least 2 games a week. We choose a practice where we warm up really good, get a good sweat going, probably close to 25 minutes, half hour into practice. And then we do 3 sprints at least 25 yards. So if we go in the gym, we go all the way out of bounds on one of the corners. So you get out of bounds maybe 10 feet and you sprint as hard as you can right through the center jump circle all the way to the opposite wing. That's about 25 yards. Then they have plenty of room to slow down. They walk back, take their time, they get in line. They have at least, 75 to 90 seconds because the sprint is only taking them about 3 seconds to 3.5 seconds. So work to rest ratio is pretty good. They do it again, they do it one more time, they're done. That's it. But what I did is I touched on it. They're never losing it. And some athletes actually continue to gain from that, depending on what their current level is. So that's a way we can keep them fresh, keep them fast during the season and not lose what we gain. Because this is what I want players to understand. Speed training, strength training, all these variables that get us to be better athletes. Why spend all this time in the off season doing it? And when the season starts, stop. Because the season's not a 2-week season. It's a 3 to 4 month, depending on how high level you are, 5 month season. And don't you want to be at your best during the season, especially when you get near sectionals and regionals and states and all that stuff? You want to be at your best. So don't stop training, just train smarter. Just lower your volume, peak that speed level, and then they should be good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are some gems right there for all those kids listening and coaches and everything. That's awesome. And I liked how you kind of mentioned maintaining at least and doing, you're still doing, because I know a lot of people during season, they just completely go off of everything. And, you can't completely get off at everything. It's just a recipe for bad disaster. I think that's why we have the jumper's knees, the tendinopathies, the tendinitis, and all these other issues. And I had a question, Lee. So you mentioned twice a week with your kid. And in regards to these speed training movements, let's say a kid says, hey, should I do these speed training movements on leg day? Should I do it after leg day? Should I kind of switch it? How would you kind of advise, players, coaches to have their athletes split their routine? Is it a field day, or separate, or hey, let's do this and then do, like, how do you kind of advise these players and coaches to
Yeah,
program it in their regular
great
schedule?
question. First of all, if our number one goal is performance and speed, and that, do speed first, do it in a more rested state. But let's say you're in a school system, like when we live in Florida now, but when we lived in Indiana, all the bigger high schools and medium-sized high school all had strength coaches. And so they took advanced PE is what they called it. And it was basically strength training. They took it as a class. So if that's the situation and you're lifting, say, third period, which is like 10 o'clock in the morning, go ahead, lift, and then do your sprints maybe after school, because you got all day to recover from your strength training. So I wouldn't advise always doing your strength training, especially if it's a good hard leg workout, then going in sprinting. I don't think you're going to get the benefits. Chance of injury, possibly, like especially if you did a lot of hamstring stuff and then you tried to sprint really fast, there's a chance, but I'm not even worried about that. I'm more concerned about the performance. But if you can, get your sprint stuff in first, then go ahead and do your strength. And that can be done in the same workout. And that's typically what I do, even with my son. I open my garage door up, we go out on the main strip there, our road, and we sprint, come in. If he has jumps that day, we'll do our jumps, and then we'll do our strength training. And our strength training is real basic. Quick in and out, and just trying to improve performance. So that's what I would do. I do believe in mixing it up every now and again, but I don't think you can ever be wrong doing the speed explosiveness stuff first, then coming back doing your strength after that. Plus, it's a great warm up for the strength training.
No, I 100% agree. We try to, when we work with our athletes trying to return to sport, they're doing the speed, plyos, power product, all before they go into the weight room. I think there's occasionally that I've done some speed stuff after for an ACL person, just to see how they move when they're fatigued.
Exactly.
But most of the time it's in the beginning, especially when they're first adapting to speed. If they can't even do it when they're not fatigued, I'm not going to have them do it when they're fatigued. But Lee, another question that I have, I know people are like, hey, we're doing sprints, we're doing side shuffle. Do we start introducing cuts? Do we start introducing different variations like the crossover step? I know I've seen you post a lot of videos on YouTube and Instagram, crossover step, which I love because it covers more ground, gets you moving. But when should we start introducing that for the athletes? Because like, hey, I'm getting faster, my volume's staying the same. We're going sprinting, we're going lateral. Do we start introducing different variables, or how do you kind of tell them to kind of progress it per se?
Yeah, this is where it gets fun for me to share this, because it's so critical. So we start introducing the 7 patterns, and I'm going to go through those for you. We introduce the 7 patterns of speed movement right off day 1. And what happens is we put them in the warm-up. Okay, so here's the 7 patterns. Number 1, so the first one are linear, the first 2. So we have acceleration and we have max velocity. Okay, and there's different ways to do max velocity training. I don't always have to sprint max velocity. I could do a type of a skip called an A skip or a snap skip. That is vertical striking, which falls under our max velocity training, right? And then acceleration could be anything as short as 3 steps. Just push, 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 and then jog it out. Push, 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 jog it out. So very easy to get those in. The second 2 patterns are lateral. We have a shuffle, which is a lateral gait cycle that one leg stays in front the whole time, the back leg stays behind the whole time. And then the second lateral one pattern is the lateral run, or you had said crossover. I just call it a lateral run. And that is kind of a combination of the shuffle posture with a actual run. And the reason I say that is because I still want to keep my shoulders, my eyes, my head oriented to my opponent. But because they're going at a speed that is faster than my shuffle can handle, I'll start running because now the gait cycle allows me to get further per step than a shuffle can. So that's why we naturally would go to that lateral rate. So there's 4 patterns: acceleration, sprint, shuffle, lateral run. Now we have to retreat. We go backwards. So we have a back pedal, and there's versions of that, but we have a basic back pedal. And then we have what we call a hip turn. And a hip turn is when, if I'm guarding you at the top of the key and you start to drive by me, I quickly pop my hips open and I begin to move backwards. And I could be moving backwards in a shuffle, a lateral run, or whatever. It's just that I'm opening and I start retreating that way. So there's 6. And then the last pattern is a jump. And again, we have a million versions of a jump, a hop, a leap, a jump sideways, a rotate, all these different things. But so what I do is every single day my athletes train, we warm up with those. So every single day they're getting exposure to all 7 patterns. We set up 20 yards. Typically, if you have 20 yards, it could be shorter than that. So let's say we're on a basketball court. Let's say that your listeners are out at the park and they want to do these. They can go sideline to sideline, and they go over back with one pattern, start the next one, over back, get 7 within 90 seconds to 2 minutes. They're done with those patterns, then go into now whatever else they want to train. There's so many other patterns that they could start combining now. So they could now move themselves to the lane, to the foul lane. They could shuffle across, shuffle back, laterally run across, lateral run back, rest, shoot 5 foul shots, repeat. Now they're starting to get change of direction with those 7 patterns.
That's awesome. I like those 7 patterns. For hopefully all you guys could, this is recorded so you guys could go back and play this again, because that was huge gems right there from Lee, right? And then I liked how you said this is part of their warm-up. I think that's great, because I think one of the things that's not done as much is the warm up for any kind of basketball team. I think I was reading a study that just any kind of warm up, well, not any kind, but like a well-rounded warm up, just like yourself. I think a lot of people think warm up just stretching, but it's a lot of plyo stuff. There's more research coming out, more plyo speed stuff, stopping, decel, shuffle actually helps decrease ACL injuries by like 54%. It's a pretty crazy number. Yeah. But I loved how you said you could get it in.
Yeah, well, and just, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just you made me think when you said that, especially for you get this more than anybody, because doing those 7 patterns, if the athlete and the parent and the coaches who are listening replay this in their mind, we talk a lot about multiplanar movement during warm-ups. We talk about preparing the body proprioceptively. In other words, the nerves communicating with the brain and the body and the muscles and the tissues, awakening those. Well, when we start backpedaling, we're doing a tremendous service to the fascial tissue, to the dorsiflexion of the toe, the mid-tarsal joint, the ankle joint, the Achilles tendon. Everything is getting involved in having to do its job from a stability standpoint in creating mobility. And we do it very gently, that we do it in the warm-up. And then if I want, on any given day, let's say today happens to be a lateral day, we want to focus more on lateral stuff. Okay, out of those 7 patterns, let's pull those 2 lateral drills out and let's focus on that. But we already hit all the other ones. Yeah. So we've trained vertically, linearly, laterally, rotationally, and then I throw in what I call my 180 series. And the 180 series is phenomenal for preparing the body. All it is let's say I run from the baseline to half court, and once I hit half court, I spin and I do a 180 and I backpedal the rest of the way. That's defensive transition in basketball. When I worked with the Sacramento Kings this past summer, or it might have been more in the spring, we spent a lot of time on that very concept, because I said, you can't underestimate that ability to accelerate quickly. Now you've got to turn, locate, where's everybody coming up the court, and you have to do that while backpedaling at pretty high speeds. So what we do is we add in a forward run, 180, backpedal, then a backpedal, 180 to a forward run. Then what we do, Marco, is, and this you'll like this because this is important. We'll start delaying head and eye movement. So I start running forward. I start doing my 180, but I'm staying focused on that baseline I'm running towards my body. So now I'm getting cervical, thoracic,
Yeah.
spinal rotation, but my eyes are staying focused. And then we do it the other way where we go early head movement, start running, and then I whip my head and eyes quickly to see what's coming. And that brings my body around. So from a mobility standpoint in open and closed chain, it's phenomenal to get athletes prepared for actual, practice and playing.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, you're hitting everything on the checklist. You're working on that mobility, that head and eye control, which is huge. And then, but I think the best thing that I like about it, it translates to the court. Like you kind of went back to every situation when you talked about, hey, you have to be looking at your defender while you're doing that crossover or lateral run per se. And then when you're doing that running straight to half court, turning around, backpedaling, that's mimics that transitioning from offense to defense or going back to defense. But no, that's awesome. And then one thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, Lee, I think this probably maybe too advanced, or I don't know if you want to talk about it, but you said lateral day. Do you advise kids to start doing a lateral day, or let's work on more of a, just straight vertical or just straight sprinting in one direction, or should we split it up completely? I know we mentioned one day you did sprints forward, the other day you did lateral shuffle. As they progress, do we still keep it or do we add in kind of components of both?
Yeah, so this is the way I try to treat it. And when I talk to players about it, I try to make them look at the way they play basketball, right? So if they go to the park to work on shooting, okay, maybe they want to work on 3-point shooting, expand their range, maybe catch and shoot, pull-ups or whatever. But they're probably going to spend 10% to 25% on touch shooting, short shots, just to get their rhythm, get loosened up. Okay, so we call the primary workout of the day, that's the primary skill. But we're going to have a secondary in there, which is going to get maybe 25. So 75% is my major, 25% is my minor focus for the day. So for example, I had mentioned today could be a lateral day, but I might warm up with some back pedal sprints, forward accelerations, A skips, like we talked about earlier, some stuff like that. Just, it's just good to touch on that stuff, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Let's just get in it. That's part of those patterns, right? But now when I'm going to get to work and I'm going to push myself with maximal speeds, I'm going to do lateral. Lateral, I might do maybe 3 to 5 sets of lateral speed. I'm going to add in some change of direction. And I'm probably going to initiate, before I even do those full speed things, straddle type jumps where maybe I stand on the foul line, but perpendicular to it. Okay. Oh, excuse me. My feet would move perpendicular to the way the foul line's facing. I put my feet right on the line as much as I can, like I'm on a balance beam, and then I straddle wide and come back, wide back as fast as possible. Because what I'm doing is I'm doing those low-level plyometric, elastic type energy exercises, but it's not very intense in terms, it's not high impact because I'm staying in place, but I'm going from a narrow stance to a wide stance, and I'm working on that ability to get in and out of those positions very, very quickly. And so then we can in turn go into the lateral gait type stuff, the shuffles, the change of directions and all. But like I said at the beginning, I put a little secondary focus on some linear acceleration. And then the next day, flip them. Today is going to be a sprint day, but I'm going to warm up with a few lateral stuff to get my body. That way, they're always touching on it at least a couple times a week.
Awesome. That's really good. I love that. And you, like you said, I think I liked how you mentioned like the skill. It's like your practice, because you're still learning the movement, right, Lee? Like you're still kind of learning the fine tunes. And I know you go a lot into, I like your angles presentation. I watched like a couple of videos on angles with your body, correct foot placement, which is like I think that's one of the most important things, and we could go on forever on that.
Yeah.
And then I have a question to kind of tie this all together. What strength movements, or a lot of people say like you still have to get stronger, still have to get stronger. I know this is kind of a hard debate, but I still go with sprinting. Some people say like, hey, you can only get faster if you go in the weight room, but I think practicing the activity itself, it's kind of like that, specificity principle. It's like those people, if you want to jump higher, you just got to jump more too, in a way,
Yeah. Yeah.
but what big movements would you, or strength movements would you pair up with speed day that are geared towards improving speed, if you do so?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of step ups and variations of step ups because they allow me to tie together the force production that I was trying to get out of my short acceleration work. So if I'm a basketball player and we got a rebound and now I have to get out on the break, my first 4 to 5 steps, especially probably by that second step, I'm close to reaching my peak power on those steps right then. Well, when I do a form of a step up where we put our foot up on a bench, maybe that's at parallel or below, not maybe quite that high, but what I do is I shift my weight forward. So my knee moves forward. And the reason I do that is I want the weight on the ball of the foot, but I want a dorsiflexed ankle. What that does is that simulates when my body leans and I accelerate by pushing down and back, we can get up. Now, to help the athletes feel that, sometimes what I do is I have them with a partner, and then we take these little elastic bands and I put it around their waist. So when they're doing a step up, their partner's pulling back on their waist. So that makes that player lean into that bench more. And so when they push, they're even though they're stepping up, it's almost like they're pushing back to step up because the band's making them go back. But what we can do with that is over time, let's start body weight, maybe a little resistance band. Let's get good at that. And then we add maybe 10 pounds dumbbells, and we can add, or we can use sandbags or whatever's available. And then what they're doing is they're increasing the ability to recruit more muscle, produce more force with more muscle fibers. And then the fact that we're still sprinting and running and jumping, we're turning that new strength into speed, into power, because we're able to use that quicker. Because the bottom, this, Marco. Bottom line is, if strength was the only thing that was going to make us faster, we would all be slower than all the power lifters in the world, right?
Exactly.
We know that's not true, right? Because they're the strongest athletes. They lift them. They're the 1,000-pound squatters,
Yeah.
but none of them are really going to beat a lot of these basketball players up the floor,
I think
right?
they can't even sprint. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so just basic stuff like that, I think, is really good. I love squatting, love all the different patterns. I don't think we have to be fancy. I think we just have to get in there, produce some force every 4 weeks, mix it up so your body does something different. I'm a big fan of going maybe a 4-week block of bilateral movements, meaning using 2 legs or 2 arms. And then the next 4 weeks, let's go single leg, like the step up or the single leg squat or whatever you want to do.
No, that's awesome. I like that step up variation. I like that cue with the band, because I think that's huge. That first step up, and kind of the mention again when you said like the first 2 steps. If you don't have your maximal speed or maximum in the first 3 steps, you're kind of done. Because you're not going to be, especially with those basketball players, long limbs, everything. They're getting a lot. It's still pretty crazy when like I see LeBron take like 2 steps from the 3-point line and he's already kind of near the paint, already jumping up, like that dunk that he had last night against Kevin Love. It's pretty crazy, but
His head was, he's
yeah,
looking at the rim. It's amazing.
at 37, that's insane. But like,
I know.
you mentioned those steps are huge on getting that max velocity, max speed.
Yes.
No, this is awesome, Lee. To kind of wrap up some of the things, I think a lot of people learned a lot. I mean, high school kids, I wish I would have had this when I was younger, because I don't know what I was doing for speed. I think, back in the day, it was just like, hey, the track, we had no purpose. This kind of brings you an outline. I think the mentality when I was growing up, it's like you have to do more, when
Yeah.
you're in high school. And like, if you're not, and then it leads to too much volume, leads to those nagging injuries. But like you said, keep it short and simple, low volume, high intensity. But what's another, your final piece of advice to any of those kids that are trying to get faster, or even college players that are trying to get faster during this these next couple months?
Yeah, yeah, really good. So there's don't underestimate these players. Don't underestimate the speed and agility work you're getting when you play. So if we were to take the ball out of the court and you just did all those movements, you just did a training session of massive speed and quickness and agility because they're having to stay in a stance and move quickly lateral. So they're getting tremendous value. So now it makes our job even easier because now what we have to do is let's simplify it. Let's improve the technical proficiency of acceleration and max velocity. Let's improve the efficiency of lateral shuffle. In other words, let's make sure that we don't get too low. It drives me nuts when coaches say, get low, get low. Well, sometimes what happens now, they enter the player into this powerful type of push when they need more elasticity. Because now they're not strong enough relative to their body weight and their strength, and now they move slower. So I'm big on evaluating my player and say, you know what, you need to come up a little bit, still have the width to be able to change directions, but you're too low, you can't move, you're like stuck in cement. So do the basic stuff like that. Make sure you get lateral shuffle, lateral run, back pedal stuff. Make sure you're able to transition from backwards or forward, right side to left side. The transition stuff is critical to change the direction, but keep it simple. Keep it because they're going to get volume. Like you said, they're playing travel basketball too. So they're going to get the volume. Just touch on the stuff a couple times a day. They'll be amazed. And I think a lot of them, and I know you see this in your profession as well. Sometimes when they get injured and it's a small injury, it makes them take like 4 or 5 days off. They come back and all of a sudden they feel faster, they lift heavier, they do stuff. And I'm like, that's called rest. That's what rest and recovery will do. And it's like they don't believe you until something happens where they have to rest. They come back. So twice a week, I've always said that pretty much covers their bases as long as they're doing that and they're still playing their sports.
That's awesome. It's funny that you mentioned that because I have a couple athletes that they had like a little mind. They're like, hey, you know what? I just feel off. I think one of them got sick, and then after is just like crazy. Yeah, his movement, everything's better. And I was like, you just needed some rest. Now they have basketball skills trainers and they have like all this, a lot of variables in the picture when you just kind of sometimes less is more, and really work on that stuff. And I also want to touch on the getting low, because I think that's one of the biggest, half the time the position that these coaches want these players to be is kind of anatomically that they can't even get into those. And when they get into those, and you probably seen it, like you mentioned, Lee, like you get into those and you see it all the time, the player gets super low on defense and gets burned by the first step because he's in an uncomfortable position and not in that power. You kind of want to be in that position that's kind of comfortable, elastic, move well, because if you're too low, that's more of a, hey, I need to jump up or get a power position. Like you said, it's not going to be that elastic position. No, I love that.
Well, it always comes down to physics and biomechanics, right? At the end of the day, you can't overcome gravity. You can't overcome, action reaction forces. You've got to use them in your favor. And if we don't, we just become less efficient.
That's pretty much performance right there. Physics and biomechanics, like you mentioned. Yeah, that's awesome. Lee, this was awesome. I know you do a lot of, you do consulting. Where can people find you? Where can people reach out? And I know you have a course too. Can you tell us about that course? That's one course that I need to start taking myself, but you kind of mentioned all this stuff. It's like, if they learn this stuff, it's a game changer. But can you tell us where can they find you and a little bit more about the different things you offer?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So what I would encourage the players, especially, is if they just search me at Lee Taft, they pretty much find me on anything, social media wise. I post a lot. I try to post pretty much every day, and they can learn a lot of drills, a lot of exercise, 30 to 60-second drills. I put them out there real quick on all the different social medias. And YouTube, I've got a lot of even older stuff that's very applicable, longer type videos that will break things down for them that they can do. So anything at Lee Taft. If they want to go to leetaft.com, there's several little courses and stuff we have that they might be interested in. There's a couple like on-court basketball speed, which is great just for footwork, good quickness stuff. But if there are coaches out there that are interested in really developing their program, like they're K through 12, they're in charge of the whole program. I just released a new course called the Certified Basketball Speed Specialist Level 1. And basically what it does, Marco, is I took the basic movements, all the basic movements we talked about and the different training methods, but I simplified it with terminology because offensively, like we might say to a player, hey, I want you to use an inside out crossover and then attack the rim, right? Well, on defense, we don't always say that. We say, hey, you're going to shuffle. Well, what we did and what I did as a coach is I will tell my players, I want you to use a snap shuffle. A snap shuffle would be used like in a hedge technique. If I'm hedging on a ball screen and I'm just trying to make that ball handler come wider, we use a smaller but quicker foot pattern. We call it a snap. So the players understand immediately what they're supposed to do. If I'm yelling, hey, you got snap coverage, here it comes, ball screen's coming, they know not to take these big, long, powerful shuffle steps. But if they're in full court man-to-man, they're going to use a power shuffle or a power lateral run. So the whole course is based on teaching these techniques, but using simple words to communicate it. So now the players and the coaches are on the same page. If I say use a waddle shuffle is a drop coverage technique that you see a lot in the colleges and in some high schools and pros use all the time. The defender doesn't hedge, they actually drop off in the lane, but rather than backpedaling, we waddle shuffle. So, and it's very simple for the athletes to understand and the coaches get to communicate it. So that's what the whole course is built on. And there's a lot of other stuff in it, but that's the whole premise.
Awesome. And then do you have any courses or any like training for the kids themselves? Like let's say a guy wants to do like some speed training. Do you have any courses or any stuff for that?
Yeah, there's a course called Basketball Speed. They can go and see that. And again, it breaks it down for them. And they're actually the athlete that I use in it, he's much older now. He's been in high school, but when he was a high school freshman, he was a great player in Indiana. He ended up playing for Butler on those Final Four, the championship teams.
Hayward and stuff. Yeah, they lost.
Yeah, he was out. Yeah, he was on that. But he was a high school kid at the time when he was training with me, and he was my model for doing this stuff. So those are drills the kids can do, and they'll see as they go in at leetaft.com, they can see the different stuff, and there's descriptions of what it is that fits what they're after. So, but again, for a lot of them, take advantage of the free stuff. Go to my YouTube, go to follow my Instagram. And, I know a lot of them don't follow Twitter probably and Facebook, but I post on all of those because it hits different populations of people. And it's just good basic drills that they can take a week's worth of drills that I have. Now you got a nice training program for a couple months.
That's awesome. And that's one thing, guys, I'm going to include all of his information down below in our links. But that's one thing you guys all have to take advantage. There's so much information nowadays on like Instagram, YouTube, and like you said, just follow Lee Taft on his Instagram, and then you could literally have, like you said, Lee, just choose 7 of those workouts, and there goes your speed day for the day.
There it is, right there. Yep.
That's something I wish I had when I was younger. Instagram didn't really exist when I was in high school and stuff. But this is crazy information that you guys could get. That's awesome, Lee. Thanks for hopping on. This is an awesome podcast, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, Lee. I'll if it's okay, I'll include your email down below. This is awesome.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, and best of luck.